Hey guys, today we have a 2006 Vauxhall Corsa that's in for a timing chain rattle, so let's go ahead and bring it in. I heard that, I hope you did too, but that's the noise that you'll hear, especially on startup, so let's take it in the workshop and have a look what's going on. Also, because we'll be dropping the oil, it's always good to open the oil cap to allow air to travel through the engine to help the oil to drain out. Same goes with the dipstick. You don't have to take it completely out, just drop it there. So underneath the car, in the engine sump, we've got the sump plug. So with a Torx 45, you can make sure it's fully inserted into the sump plug. That was actually a bit tight. The reason we're draining the oil is because we want fresh oil to go into all of the moving parts on the chain, because it's all oil fed. And also when we take off the timing cover, the water pump is on the timing cover, so it'll leak any coolant that's in the system into the sump anyway. So we're going to leave the sump plug off now. We'll put a catch tray underneath the engine, so when we take off the cooling system, it'll just drain through. What I'm also going to do now is drain the cooling system from the radiator over here. That way you're not getting the whole reservoir going through into the sump. Okay, so what we could do is take the radiator pipe off and allow it to go through there, but there, just here is a bleed nipple for the cooling system, so, or a drain plug for the cooling system. So I'll just take this off now, drain it. Also, it'd be a good idea to take the cap off the coolant reservoir, again to allow air to travel through, to force all the coolant through here, so you don't get everything going into the oil sump. Looks like a 13, yeah. Should be 17mm bolt, yeah. So we'll just take the wheel off, gives us a little bit more access to the side of the engine which needs to come off. So when the wheel is off, the access it gives you is just to get to the bolts of the crank pulley, take off the auxiliary belt and all these items here. Like I said, you can get these from underneath, but it is nice, especially for the crank pulley, to get in through the side here. Now that we're back up top, we can take off the earth strap of the battery just to disconnect it. That way, when it comes time to disconnect things like the alternator and things like that, everything's safe to touch, just in case you accidentally touch a live and you're not supposed to. It keeps you safe. Next is to take off these air pipes. So we take off the sensor to the aircon. So using a Torx 20, you can start to take off these. Just make sure you keep these safe to one side. Then these Jubilee clips are normally a 7mm. Disconnect the sensor, pop that off there. This should just pop up. It's on rubber mounted clips. That just comes straight out. Off these breather pipes. These are special pliers for these types of spring clips, so I'll put a link to these in the description. Just want to help it off. There we go. And again, there's another Jubilee clip on top of the throttle body, so we can take this pipe off. Just so it's out of the way, I'm also going to take this pipe off the coolant reservoir. There you go. And this, because it goes across the rock cover, you can just place it out of the way, disconnect the coil packs, again a little flathead, twist. There we go. That's off there. These, I believe, are Torx 30. Okay, and I'm also going to show you a little tip, because with these, the coil packs can be sometimes stuck in place because they can grab quite tightly onto the spark plugs. What a lot of people do, and it's wrong, is get a flathead and try and prise it up in the corner, but you can either break the coil pack or you can break the rocker cover doing it that way, if it's especially tight. These are 13s. If you look on the coil pack itself, there's another thread outside of the ones that you've taken off. So you can thread this on the top, thread it there. These can act as a kind of handle to work. They still can be quite tight, but doing it this way avoids any damage to the coil pack or the rocker cover. Okay, so we're going to take off. Okay, so on the side here you've got the oil pressure sensor. These are notorious to fail, by the way. Oh, this one actually looks like it started to go. As oil passes through here and starts to leak out. This, I think, actually is less than a year old, so that shouldn't be happening. There you go. Okay, so now we've got this pipe to take off. That one was tight. We've got a E10 to take off these rocker cover bolts. Again, another tight one. So what we're going to do now is to turn the crank. I'm going to take off the cover here for the crank locking tool to go into the side of the block. And what we'll do is that we'll turn the crank until it touches that locking tool, and then we'll check the cams to make sure that they are in the correct position. I've cracked this was quite tight. Take that off, keep that safe. Out of the timing kit, it's this tool. What I'll do now is, because I can't insert that, I'll turn this until it slots in. That's slotted in there. Going to make sure it's fully inserted in. Now we'll check the top. You can see here that it's not quite going in, which means that our engine is slightly out of time. So what we're going to do now is loosen the sprockets and adjust the cams to make sure that they're all locked up and it's all properly timed. So take the sensor out of the way. This is the cam position sensor. So this is what picks up the signal off this target ring here. Now that is out of the way, we can put a socket onto here to loosen this bolt, and a spanner just over here. You need to hold the camshaft in place with these flat edges here. Should be a 21. Don't take it completely out, just slack enough so that the cams can move without moving the sprocket. We've only moved the cams just enough to slot these in correctly. Okay, so now that the cams are locked and the crank is locked, we're going to have to start taking off the pulleys on the side of the engine. So before jacking it up, it's a good idea, and before you've taken off the auxiliary belt, to try and loosen or at least crack the bolts on the pulleys, because with the belt off, it's going to just be turning when you're trying to take them off. So at least this way, you're acting against the grip of the auxiliary belt as well, so it can just help you to take them off. So for the water pump pulley, it just helps you can get onto it now, and the belt will hold it in place for you to crack those bolts. So that'll come off nice and easy once this mount is off. Okay, so what I need to do is to take this tensioner off. I haven't got anything that can fit on there without removing this mount first. So what I'll do is I'll remove carefully this side of the tensioner, just so I can take that off now. I'm going to take off the aircon compressor. And there's one bolt in the back. Okay, so the aircon compressor is off. We need to take off the alternator. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take off this supporting structure and the exhaust, detach that from the manicat, because when I need to jack up or lower the engine, it's going to reduce the strain that's on the exhaust, and when it does come down, it's going to get in the way of this. So we'll take those off now and go from there. Okay, so to take the alternator off, it is a E14. If you are doing this job yourself, get yourself an E-torque set. You have to move the spring from the tensioner out of the way to get the bottom bolt. So this bolt here, you're gonna have to move this spring up slightly just to get that out, and then it'll be nice and easy to get the top one. And then you can just sit the alternator just to the side. Out of the alternator. We'll work it around with a lever bar. Okay. Just be careful you don't actually pull on the wiring itself. You can take it out completely actually, it's no hardship to just take the alternator completely out. So it sits nicely there on the drive shaft. Okay, so now it's time to support the engine with the jack. We're going to use a rubber block on the jack on the base of the sump to hold that engine in place for us to take the engine mount off. Now that we're under the car, we can get at some of the bolts for the engine mount frame. So we can get everything that we can from down here. There may be one that we get up from up top. We'll have to move the engine up and down for this part, just to make it a little bit easier to get access to those bolts. And then hopefully we can work it out through the top somehow, and then have access to the water pump. That's the tensioner out. Because we've loosened these bolts earlier, we're able to just undo these by hand and take off the water pump pulley. Oh, we can get out all the bolts for the timing cover. Need to take off the crank pulley that goes through that timing cover, so we'll do that now, and then it's just those small e-tocks. Tip when you're taking off the old water pump is to, if you've got your new one ready, you can take each E10 bolt. As it comes out of the old, it can go into the same placement on the new. I do this because not every bolt is the same length, and you don't want to mix it up later on, putting an incorrect bolt in the incorrect hole. So as soon as it comes out of the one on the car, it goes to the new one and it just slots into place. Like I've done here, so you can see them all in the correct placements. And then as the new pump is on the car, I would then one by one put these back and swap them over. It's a little bit tedious, but I do this just to make sure that there's no mistakes, and then you can make sure that all the bolts are in the right place. Now all we've got to do is take off the bolts for the timing cover itself. Most of these are E10s. Again, just make sure that you keep them in the correct order, because some of them are longer than others, so they need to be going back in the correct place. There's another two sneaky ones just on the side. E10s again. You have to use an extension just because it's a little bit too close to the sump. This should be free now, unless I've missed any. Also, it's worth noting that all of the bolts on the timing cover, apart from the two around the oil pump, were E10s, and the ones around the oil pump were E14s. There are some spaces, like behind the oil pump here, where there's little lips where you can leave a big, again, you've got to be very careful with the amount of pressure that you use. It's very easily damaged, and there should be dowels as well to help it guide on, so it can't just like come up, it needs to come outwards. And here's our assembly for the timing chain, and more often than not, our culprit is this bad boy. So it's two E10s that hold on the tensioner. This is basically just fed with oil pressure to hold the tension tight on the chain, and when that isn't held on with oil pressure, there's a little spring that's inside here. More often than not, that these go weak and allow too much slack on the chain before the oil pressure builds, and it allows then for that rattle on startup. Very, very common. And on the other Vauxhalls with the ratcheting type, it's always the ratchets that tend to fail as well, so they don't hold their pressure either. So the rest of it should come off fairly easily. These sprockets are now only hand tight, so just hold the chain to make sure it doesn't fall in. So the guide towards the back of the engine is a Torx 40 at the bottom. And that just comes up. So you've got two of these Torx 30s along the side here. And the bottom sprocket just slides off. Once you've got the old pulleys off, you might want to just compare them to the new, just to see what the differences are, what the signs of wear are. You'll notice the teeth on the old ones, the ones that are worn, are just, it's not a crazy amount, but they're just a little bit more sharper on the teeth, where the little bit more of a blunt edge has worn away. Same goes for the new crank pulley compared to the old. The difference there just shows that this is a little bit more worn away. So these are on dowels. Again, I need to be helped off. Make sure the surface is nice and clean for the new gasket to go on. You'll notice that you've still got some remnants of the old seals that are stuck to the surface, so they'll have to be cleaned off. Again, these are E10s. So here's the new guide. Let's make sure that's in the right place. Let's put the tensioner in place. You'll notice it's got a pin that you pull out then to release the tension. It's held all the way back so you can fit the chain nice and easily. Sprockets. Got to make sure that these are in their proper position. Again, don't put them tight. These need to be able to move independently of the cams. Some bolts you reuse, but for these camshaft and the sprocket bolts, these are stretched bolts, so when you tension them up, the threads will actually stretch in order for them to stay in place. So you can't reuse these. You'll have to have the new bolts that come in the kit. But again, just tight enough so you can still spin. Put the cam sprocket into the chain and use the two flat edges on the side of it to guide it on to the actual crank. Bit of a wiggle as you go on. As on, you'll be able to guide it up and over the sprockets. So here's the new front guide. Once the front is in, we can guide in the top. Need to make sure that the chain is inside the lip of the guide. Remember, the rear guide is a Torx 40 and the fronts are two Torx 30s. Okay, so the tensioner guide rail is 20 Newton meters. The other guide rail is 8 Newton meters, and the same goes for the tensioner here. These are 8 Newton meters for the torque setting. Eight does feel a little bit slack for these, so I do like to make sure it has a nip. Okay, now we're ready to pull the pin. Again, it wasn't much, but all nice and tight. So now we can start to refit the timing cover and we'll put the target wheel back in place. So you just want to make sure there's no moisture or any debris stuck in here. So it's always good to give it a wipe down. We've got our new crank seal. Use just a little bit of engine oil just to lube up to help it go in nicely so it doesn't grab anywhere. Make sure it goes in the right way around. You should find that it comes to like a nice, should seat nicely. And you're all good. Make sure the gap or the ridge all the way around it's the same, just so you know it's in nice and level. Now refitting the timing chain cover can be a little bit fiddly because of how tight it sits up against the oil sump. Some people find it easier to actually loosen the sump completely, change that seal as well while doing this job. So rather than try and force it into place, we're going to loosen the engine sump and it'll all go back together a lot nicer. There's no point trying to force it on because you'll end up damaging something. These are E10s, but it looks like there's E14s or E16s on the other side here, because part of this side of the bell housing is the sump as well. So you want to be careful not to nick the seal you've just put on the crank pulley as well. Remember there's dowels, so it's got to guide on nice. You can't just force it into place. So what we've done, rather than force the timing cover into the dowels to force it in, we've loosened a couple more of the sump bolts just so we can push it down a little bit just to get it in nice. So it's slotted in now. The reason why we've had to put the engine hoist onto it is just because we needed to take the pressure off the sump. So we'll just leave this here for now whilst we do everything up. Okay, seeing as we're down here retightening up the sump bolts, we may as well put the alternator back. Because it's just resting here on the drive shaft, we're more or less here already. So let's just push this up into position. Right, that's the alternator on, so we can put the tensioner back on now and the aircon compressor while we're here. Let's get the aircon compressor back on. Get that started. One at the back. When you're ready, we can insert the crank pulley, and then the bolt will put a little bit of Loctite on here.
In order to set the correct position for the target wheel, you have a crescent moon shaped tool like this one, which bolts to the top of the timing cover. It has a notch which slots into that target wheel to make sure it can only go in the correct position.
A lot of this reassembly is just everything that you did to take it off, but in reverse order. So all these little pieces, like this thermostat, all the wiring, little sensors, all of those need to go back on, and to make sure that the blanking plug for the timing tool on the side of the block, that gets put back on as well. Now that the engine is back on the mounts, now is the perfect time to double check the timing, rotate the engine, make sure that there's no issues, and then as long as that's okay, we can put oil in it and start it up, see where we go. When you're happy that you've double checked your timing and everything's fine, you can start to take off the oil filter, just to make sure this has got a new one. So what we'll do is put on a new oil filter, put the rocker cover on, and then we'll fill it with oil and start it up. So we've got a nice clean new oil filter. Make sure you lubricate the seal so it doesn't grab when you put the new one on. Start it off by hand because they're only plastic threads. Make sure you keep an eye on the seal just to make sure it doesn't grab anywhere. Remember, these are 32mm sockets for these oil filters. Yeah. We're about to get ready to put the rocker cover on and put oil in the engine. So before we do that, obviously we need to put our new sump plug in the sump. And if you haven't already, make sure the drain plug is tight for the cooling system. Also, like earlier, make sure the exhaust is tight because we loosened this for when we were moving the engine up and down, and the supporting bracket that goes across the subframe. So we fitted new seals to the rocker cover. Gently position it over. Until it kind of slots into place. It should seat really nicely. Tighten up the bolts. You normally go into a spiral pattern when you tighten them. Every car has a procedure for doing this, so I'd recommend you check your tech data or have a look online for your specific car just in case it's different. When you're happy everything is back on, then you can fill up the engine with oil. I'd leave filling up the water system until after you've had it started, just in case there's any issues. At least then, if you do have to start taking things apart again, you don't have to drain the cooling system. So yeah, we'll put oil in it now and start it up. When you're happy it's full of oil, make sure the dipstick's in properly, the oil cap's closed, and reconnect the battery. So she started up without any problems. I'm really happy with that. So now the only thing is to do is to warm her up, make sure that the oil level is correct, check for any leaks, and make sure that we bleed the cooling system. So we need to fill that, bleed it, and go on road test. But that's it for this video, guys. Hope this has helped, and please like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you've got any questions, or if you've got any suggestions of something that you want me to go in more in depth in. Yeah, just leave a comment and I'll get back to you. Cheers.